By his early 20s, Todd Rundgren was not only one of the most up-and-coming music producers of his era, he was also one of the age's most prolific and influential songwriters. Having written, recorded and produced his first two solo albums in 1970 and 1971, he took his songwriting and creativity to new heights, kicking off 1972 with his massive double album, Something Anything. Included was a song considered to be one of Rundgren's classic tracks, composed in only a matter of minutes, I Saw the Light. Hello there, it's Warren Hewitt here. I hope you're doing marvellously well. Welcome back to another episode of the series. If you haven't already, please subscribe, and if you hit the notification bell, you'll be notified when we have a new video. And if you're into production, you can go to producelikeapro.com and sign up for the email list and get a whole bunch of free goodies. Todd Rundgren was born on June the 22nd, 1948, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He taught himself how to play guitar while engrossing himself in the record collection of his parents. There was no pop music in our house when I was growing up. Dad built his own hi-fi and played a lot of 20th century orchestral composers. Ravel, Debussy, Richard Rodgers, show tunes, Bob Newhart too, even Roger Whittaker. Mum listened to the radio. A friend and I memorized an entire Gilbert and Sullivan libretto as a way to prove how smart I am. I refused to do well at school. You're not teaching me anything interesting. Gilbert and Sullivan's writing style was very 19th century. It changed the way we hear music. The French Impressionists came after that, less traditional, less strictly representational. Ravel represents to me the apotheosis of it all, along with Debussy and Sartre. Rundgren decided to pursue a career in music immediately following his high school graduation. He began in a blues rock band, but quickly began searching for his own original sound. In 1967, he formed the band Nas with his then roommate, bassist Carson Van Alsten. He would later become a writer and artist for Disney Comics. First, I got my roommate Carson Van Alsten, who was the bassist in Woody's Truck Stop. He became the bass player, and then we looked for a couple of other guys. Since Woody's Truck Stop had been kind of the most popular band in downtown Philadelphia at the time, it was pretty easy to convince everyone to stop what they were doing and start a new group with us that was musically based on the combination of The Who and the Beatles and the Yardbirds, mostly English bands that were influential, particularly on me, since I wound up doing most of the writing. We were all into these English bands, and also there was a little bit of Beach Boys mixed in there as well, in terms of the harmonies. And there was probably something we had in common with The Who, because The Who were big Beach Boy fans as well. The band was signed by Atlantic Records in 1968, and it was through their first album together that Rundgren cut his teeth, both as a songwriter and a producer. He recalled that his interest in production came after watching their first album's producer, Bill Traut, work quickly through the mixes as they recorded at ID Sound Studio in Los Angeles. So I got it into my head, well, he's gone now, so why don't we just mix it again, more like the way we want it? Our engineer didn't mind if we went and just started diddling around on the board. It was pretty much trial and error. Nas experienced some success with two 1968 singles written by Rundgren, Open My Eyes and Hello, It's Me. The band released 3 albums together, but both Rundgren and Van Alsten had left the band before the release of their second album, Nas Nas, in 1969. Rundgren's departure was due in part to his changing musical interests. He was fascinated by the music of Laura Nyro, which struck him with its more complicated melodic and harmonic elements. He told Bill Domain in 2004 that it was not just chords that are richer, major and minor sevenths and suspensions and things like that, but the sort of melodic movement and the classical counterpoint elements. That's one of the things that attracted me. But I know for a fact that her influences were the more sophisticated side of R&B, like Jerry Ragovoy and Man and Weil and Carole King. That is Laura Nyro's lineage. After leaving Nas, Rundgren focused his efforts on production. Through his Nas connections, he found his way to a position as a staff engineer and producer under Albert Grossman, who apparently promised that he would become the highest paid producer in the world, a prophecy that eventually materialized. While working under Grossman's wing, Rundgren mostly produced lesser-known folk artists, but after producing Jesse Winchester's 1970 debut album, he was recruited by the band to record their massively successful 1970 album, Stage Fright. The record hit number 5 on the Billboard 200. In 1970, Rundgren essentially released his first solo album, but under the name of the trio that he had put together for the album, Runt. It wasn't until later reissues that the album became credited to Rundgren. The record gave him a top 20 single, We Gotta Get You a Woman. While working on his follow-up album, Runt, the Ballad of Todd Rundgren, he also produced the self-titled debut album for a new band called Half Nelson, a nascent version of The Sparks. Rundgren credits the period of time during his second album, when he discovered recreational drugs, for his bout of non-stop productivity. This became even more evident on his third album, Something Anything, an epic double album. It was the first one officially released under Rundgren's solo artist name, featuring the hit single I Saw the Light. Something Anything was written and recorded in late 1971, first at ID Sound Studios in Los Angeles, then the record plant in New York, and finally at Bearsville Studios in Woodstock. He explains that the album evolved as it passed through the different locations. By the time I got to the actual work of doing Something Anything, in those days I didn't have a studio of my own, so I had to write outside the studio and essentially record in more or less a conventional way. I had a couple of songs done for the record, and I certainly had enough songs to get the record started. I didn't have all the songs, and indeed when I started Something Anything, I didn't know that it was going to turn out to be a double album. It was in this mental space that he wrote I Saw the Light. By the time I sat down to write I Saw the Light, I just had this little grain of an idea, and 20 minutes later the song, words, and all was finished. It just kind of splurted out because things were becoming a bit habitual. For me, I had an aversion to the real flat sort of chords, unless you were doing them on a loud guitar. Just playing triads and things like that didn't appeal to me as much on the piano. I like a lot of suspensions. As for the guitar solo, I have no idea what inspired it. It just came out. I knew I had to have a solo, and the first part was easy because that was just the melody of the song. But the second half of it, I'm not exactly sure what I was thinking at the time, but it was all done in a studio. I hadn't worked it out beforehand. I just started messing with some ideas, and that's what I came up with. It's a little bit of the Beatles and Your Bird Can Sing, I guess, but the exact influence on it I can't tell you. In the wake of Carole King's Tapestry, one of 1971's biggest albums, I Saw the Light showcases obvious resonances to King's songwriting and artistry. The keyboard-heavy groove, of course, but also the vocals. His own vocal performance mirrors King's stylistic inflections, as do the background vocals. Empowered by the confidence he had gained during his first two albums and by his success in producing other artists, Rundgren's Something Anything was largely an independent project. Most of the instrumental parts were recorded by Rundgren himself. He recalled, I felt I'd accomplished something. I'd never played drums or bass before, though I would hector those that did. Arrangements were built from the rhythm section. I knew exactly what the instruments sound like. I Saw the Light and the rest of the Something Anything album was self-produced by Rundgren, with James Lowe credited as the engineer and John Lee as the assistant engineer. It was released in February of 1972 on the Bearsville label. The album peaked at number 29 on the Billboard 200 and found a top 5 hit with his self-cover of a former Nas song, Hello, It's Me. I Saw the Light hit number 16 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 11 on the Cashbox Top 100. Anticipating the song's hit potential, Rundgren purposefully chose to place it as the album's opening track and credits the practices of Motown for that reasoning. The song and the album cemented Rundgren's legacy as not only an exemplary music producer, but also a consummate songwriter and performer. Generations of artists have since sourced his work as an inspiration. This song and album in particular. Axl Rose famously told Rolling Stone magazine in 1989 that his favorite album was Something Anything. In honor of the record's 50th anniversary, several artists came together, recording and releasing a cover tribute album entitled Someone, Anyone. Todd Rundgren is a huge influence on pretty much everybody I know. It's interesting that Utopia was a band that I remember kind of coming out around the new wave post-punk period and seeping into Britain. And that's actually how I found out about Todd Rundgren. I had to go backwards to understand and hear about albums like anything. And when I did, I was just blown away. I actually loved that even more because the sensibilities were incredibly musical and I could hear the influences all over the place. Rundgren is one of those artists that the greatest, sort of most musical people always talk about. If you talk to anybody who has a really beautiful, sophisticated sense of melody and harmony, Todd Rundgren always comes up. All the accomplished, incredible musicians I know always talk about Todd Rundgren. As a producer, he was legendary. He obviously went on to produce some XTC, one of my favorite bands ever. His legacy is enormous. I saw him play maybe 4 years ago with Ringo. I must say, if you haven't, check out the Someone Anyone album. It's really fantastic. And my very, very good friend, very dear old friend, Louise Goffin, has a cover of this song. And if you stay tuned, we are going to give away the multi-tracks to her version of I Saw the Light, which was mixed by Dave Way. And Dave Way is going to give you a breakdown of how to mix it or how he mixed it. And Fernando, who co-produced it with Louise, is going to show you how he recorded it. So stay tuned for that as well. It's always an honor to talk about the finest musicians in the world, the finest songwriters, the finest producers, and Todd Rundgren is definitely all three of that. Thank you ever so much for watching. Give us any more ideas. We'd really appreciate it. So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, au revoir, adios, goodbye.